Hallo und herzlich willkommen zu Unzensiert, unserer politischen Gesprächsreihe hier beim Filmfest Hamburg mit freundlicher Unterstützung der Zeitstiftung. Ich bin ganz besonders froh, dass heute die Filmemacherin Suba Sivakumaran bei mir zu Gast ist. Welcome, so great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here.
The Filmfest Hamburg is screening your first feature film. It's called House of My Fathers, and it's a very powerful, political, as well as poetic tale of two Sri Lankan villages. But maybe you like to explain us what your movie is about for you.
Sure. So it's I always find it difficult to explain or speak about it, but it's an allegory. It's a fairy tale about two villages who suddenly find themselves unable to have children, and they have to then have peace talks because they're villages that have always been at war, because they receive a vision that says one man and one woman have to go into the forest of the past to find the solution. So they have peace talks and they send these two people off into the forest where many things happen and where they encounter the ghosts of their past. And it's only by confronting the ghosts of their past are they able to come up with a solution to have children again and for the future.
Yeah. And of course, we don't want to spoil anything,
Sure.
but we go in all these aspects a little deeper now.
Sure.
So these two villages, they have a fence in the middle.
That's right, yes.
And they lost a lot of soldiers over a war that was going on for decades.
For decades, yes.
Yes, and one village is Tamil and the other one
Is Sinhala.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and this is something that actually happened in your home country, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. There was a war between, it was a complex war, but essentially between a group of Tamil people and the Sinhalese government that happened for nearly 30 years, which ended in 2009. And now we find ourselves nearly 10 years after that end of the war and sort of thinking about the questions that those 30 years have brought up in us.
Yeah. You have some very strong sentences in your movie. One of those is, "The past in this country is never dead. It lives in us." Is it like that?
Yeah, I think that it's true for any country, but I also think it's particularly true for our country, where I think there has not been maybe a lot of effort to really look back into the past and think about why these things happened and what were the things that led to it. And I think that if you don't look into that past and if you don't understand who you are and maybe how, as each individual, we have failed other people, you can't really move on and you can't really have a different future. And that's what that film is about.
Was it difficult to convince actors in your country to actually be part of this project, to face their past?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I'm here with my wonderful actress as well in the audience. I think it was funny. I wrote the script, and there's a Sinhalese village and a Tamil village. And in Sri Lanka, we don't actually understand each other's language. So I had a separate Sinhala script and a separate Tamil script. And, I think that for everyone who read the script, the full script, they really wanted to be a part of it. So in that sense, yeah, it was not hard at all. And they gave everything of themselves to the film.
And did you do a lot of research to understand both sides properly?
Yeah, I think so. I was also working there after the tsunami directly, and it was the time when the conflict was also starting up. And I had the ability to travel across the country, across Sinhala, Muslim, Tamil villages, for a period of a couple of years, really living with those villages and trying to understand that. I of course, am Tamil, but it was during that time that I really saw the other side and started to also understand what had happened. So in addition to the sort of civil war, there was also internal wars between each community. So there was a big uprising in the Sinhala community in the south where there were these groups, this group that tried to overthrow the state and that was brutally put down. And of course, on the Tamil side as well, you had many people, many groups also trying to overcome the LTT who also brutally put them down. So it was a very similar way of holding on to power in both communities, which I think, was an interesting way to look at it.
And I picture there to be a lot of wounds as well as prejudices on both sides.
Yeah.
So you grew up with that as well? Or?
So I was born in Sri Lanka, and then I left right after I was, as a child. My parents, we moved around the world, and then I went back after the tsunami to live there. And so it was an interesting way to think about how people outside as well grew up, because there's a large refugee community outside. There's a large diaspora outside on both sides, on both Tamil and Sinhala. So you have a parallel world outside of the country that's also looking very closely at what is happening and trying to understand that, because in a way we never really left it, I would say.
Do you speak both languages?
I only speak Tamil.
So you always had a translator with you then?
There wasn't a translator, but I speak a little bit of Sinhala, but it's pretty bad. So yeah, I really relied on a Sinhala script that I had translated, as well as the cast and crew, and English was definitely the language we tried to use as much as we can.
And why did you choose to tell the story as a tale? I mean, you could have done a documentary.
Yeah, I think that, I guess another point about documentaries is that I also feel like a documentary is still fictionalized in some way. There's still a point of view you choose. So for me, I think as fiction and as a fairy tale, I wanted to show that we were similar in both ways. And you could only really do that by removing names and places. And in the movie, nothing is shown where someone does something to someone else, because it doesn't really matter who did what. I mean, the point of the movie is that we all suffer from it. And it kind of tried to remove this kind of, them, us, he did this, she did that, they did this. I mean, that's not the point or the objective of the movie.
But you do have some really strong pictures in it, though. I mean, like some horror trips. I would use that. I was scared.
Yeah. Yeah. I think as a fantasy or as a fantasy horror, it does also borrow from history and those images to show that. I mean, in my view, nothing is as horrific as history. You can't imagine anything as bad as reality, and so it does borrow from those historic images.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're right. You have some. On the other hand, you have a lot of strong sexual images as well between couples.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if that was a problem at all. I was kind of surprised to I have to admit that, to see a movie from Sri Lanka.
Yeah, actually, I think Sri Lankan films, especially if you look at films from Vimukthi, Jayasundara, Asoka Handagama, all both great filmmakers. There is a strong confrontation of sexuality, and I think that especially during wartime, but also, of course, as being human, you can't really avoid that. I think it becomes intensified at certain points, particularly because of trauma and violence. But it's also, I think, deeply embedded into a kind of primitive way of experiencing wartime. And I think that's what I would try to be honest about. Of course, it's difficult. We're still a conservative country, and I think that we tried to do it in an honest way. And I have to really thank both actors and actresses who were incredibly professional and really gave it their professional dignity.
Is censorship a problem if it comes to filmmaking in your country?
Yeah, I mean, I think that censorship is a problem. It's always a problem. I think, the government has changed in Sri Lanka. I think it's definitely a better environment for expression now. But even having said that, there is censorship in different forms and in different, sometimes from unexpected places, whether it's from the state or whether it's from your own community.
Really?
Yeah, and I think that we recently had a case of a film being pulled from local film festival, which was done by our own community, and it was interesting because it was thought that the film would have offended certain members of that community, and so there's I think this sensitivity, which in some ways is understandable because we are a post-war nation, and there's a lot of grievances around. But I think that censorship is obviously wrong in this instance precisely because there's so much baggage from the past. You have to be able to speak the truth to be able to understand each other. And I think we're still not quite able to fully understand what each other is saying. Without thinking, oh, if that person says that, they're pro this group, or if they say this, they're pro that other group. You have to be either this or that, and you can't get in between that.
If it comes to understanding a movie, and especially probably as a Westerner, I wondered if or I had the feeling that there are kind of hidden messages in it too, so that I probably wouldn't get all of them because it was a very special way you told your tale. Mm-hmm. So is that part of your filmmaking, that you have this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess maybe it's a difference in terminology. I don't believe in having messages in the film, only because I think that a film should be faithful to its story and its characters first, rather than try to convey a message. But there are references in the film, as you say. There are references to history, there are references to the past, because that's what the film is speaking about, and it's speaking about grounding it somewhere. So yeah, I think, while we were editing this film, and it was a very long edit. I have to thank my editor as well, who's here, who did a great job. It was nearly 2.5 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was a long edit. And it went through many, many versions. Because I think the earlier versions, Sri Lankan audiences can understand what's happening. They understand, I guess they understand the language, and they understand the story, and they understand also the myths on which it's built. Because I think both in Hindu mythology, you have this exile in a forest in the Ramayana, and then you sort of have to go through all these adventures in the forest, and then you get to an end. And I guess, in Christianity, you have Jesus in the wilderness for 40 days, and all that kind of stuff, and you sort of question, who you are as a human being, and so the film really, spoke or picked up on those things, and came back to it. But because of that, the edit was very complex, because we were trying to operate on many levels, on a symbolic, on a aesthetic, on a spiritual, on a narrative level. And it took a while for us to find the form.
So 2.5 years of editing is not 2.5 years of every day watching the movie again and again. But it's like a process of where.
Yeah, it's a process. You do it. You go out of it. You come back to it. You go.
So you had a little holiday in between. Or?
Yeah, I would call it a holiday, more exhaustion. But yes, yeah, there was a
breakdown holiday.
Yeah, exactly. There were definitely breaks in between. Yeah, yes, that's right.
Yeah, and you discussed it with different people.
I think it was my editor that I trusted the most with it, especially during the edit stage, until it got to a more complete form. And then, of course, my wonderful producer and the sales agent got involved as it got towards the end. But in the beginning stage, actually, pretty much no one saw it. It was just me and my editor. Yeah.
You're a female filmmaker. There are still not a lot of female filmmaker voices out there, I think especially in Sri Lanka. Tell us about your experience as a female filmmaker.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think on the shoot it was pretty funny because it was just two women, me and my actress Pradeepa. But I have to say that everybody was lovely. I mean, they really took care of us. It was us and probably about 20 men on the shoot, and they really treated us so well. So I really have to thank that. I mean, I never experienced any challenges working with technicians, whether it's my DP or sound or art or everyone else involved in the production of it. so in that sense, there was no problem. Maybe because I was working with a female co-producer who really understood me and understood the story I was trying to say. There was we were almost instantly on the same page as soon as we met. I think maybe where the challenge is that it might be difficult for broader audiences to understand that this came from a woman, because it's probably violent, it's probably primitive in some ways, it's raw, it's not neat, and it's not pretty, and it doesn't fit into a nice little box. So I think because of that, maybe certain distributors or programmers or audiences may find that challenging.
Well, isn't it even better? I mean,
well, you're a woman, yes, but I don't think we quite live in that world where it's become normal. Let me put it that way. Yeah. I think there's still some distance to go before those voices are seen as completely normal.
You actually ever talked to somebody? I mean, you probably screened the film in Sri Lanka already. I couldn't find out about that.
No, I haven't yet.
You haven't?
No,
Oh, that would be interesting.
Yeah.
Are you planning to?
I certainly hope so. I certainly hope that it would pass a public performance screening certificate. You have to get basically a form of a graded or censorship certificate. I certainly hope that one day it will show that.
Yeah. I mean, your first short movie, it was called I Too Have a Name. Mm-hmm. Was in competition at the Berlinale Film Festival in 2012 as well, and screened over 25 film festivals worldwide. And it was a movie on women's voices as well.
Yes.
So you must have received some kind of response for that.
Yeah. No, I think that, I think there definitely are not a lot of female filmmakers in South Asia and Sri Lanka. But there also are a couple, so I can't say that I'm the only one, and that's certainly not the case. But it's definitely a few. I think it's been interesting, I think, for men in Sri Lanka to see these films, especially the first short film, and to understand that, how do I put it, that women have thoughts and aspirations that maybe have not a lot to do with them. Where they are obstacles or where they don't really understand, but there's a certain independence of thinking, which I think is a real barrier for some people. Not all, I have to say.
Do you have maybe a concrete example for that?
Oh God, it's hard to think of a concrete example. I think the previous film also happened within the church. And it was about a woman sort of finding the courage to stand against a senior member of the church in Sri Lanka. And I think that was also sort of taken, from reality, from a few, a few examples I saw from real life. So you have these very spiritual figures who supposedly believe in equality and humanity, but still have deeply embedded unequal gender beliefs in them.
Yeah. I read another interview with you, and there you said, too often women are seen as victims or purely as objects of desire. I wanted to get away from that, but in a way that was still relevant, in a Sri Lankan context and not in a Western way. Mm-hmm. Would you please explain this Western way to us if it comes to that topic?
Sure. So I think it's... I think there is a difference between Western or first world feminism and third world or third wave. Well, third wave is different, but third world feminism. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes it has seemed to me on the outside that being a feminist requires you to take up a mic and always say, I believe in this, I stand up for this, to be a very public figure and to be full of opinions and assertions and to be full of strong statements. And of course, I definitely am very grateful to those feminists who have paved the way for the rest of us to benefit from that. But I just wanted to make the point that most women are full of doubt, actually, and they have to live in worlds with men, and they can't leave them behind. They have men as employers, they have men as husbands, they have men as children, they have men, in a war around them, and they can't go to war with those men all the time. They have to find a way to coexist and to have almost independent thoughts in their own head without necessarily always expressing it. I think that was the thing I wanted to say.
Yeah, it's different to be a feminist, and depends on
Yeah.
which country you're in.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, and also it depends on your personality, of course, and there are feminists of all kind. But, sometimes the feminist movement has not been very inclusive of all kinds. It has wanted champions, and sometimes you don't always seem a champion, but you are inside.
Yeah, you seem like one. Do you feel as the champion feminist?
I don't. I look up to feminists, especially those in Sri Lanka who have had to suffer and fight for things that in other countries are normal, and they have to keep fighting. Even for, sometimes you think you've won a war, but then 10 years later you find that nothing has changed, and you fight to hold on to the ground that you've gained. But no, I am an observer. I'm a filmmaker. I see it from the outside. I am not out there doing that daily fight, and I have all the respect for those people who do that.
But you are into humanitarian aid as well, aren't you? I mean,
yeah, no,
you actually do help people a lot.
Yeah, no, that's my other career. But yeah. And that's more a broader, I think, working with poverty and working with aid work. And I think in all of those things, I guess this is another point, is that I don't think that feminism should be something alone, but it should fight for everybody's rights, whether it's gay rights or the rights of low caste, those who are downtrodden. Like, we should be not necessarily thinking of ourselves in groups, but really thinking, where is the injustice happening? So, I mean, that I think the aid work sort of fits within that broader remit.
I would love you to tell me about how you actually became a filmmaker, because I think you came from a completely different background.
Yeah.
And so I would love to know, how that happened.
I mean, I think so. I studied political science, and then later on I studied policy at a graduate level, and I always wanted to work within aid work. As I said, I started working in Sri Lanka at the end of 2004 after the tsunami, and then after graduate school joined the UN and was working in development work more broadly. I also think that when you're sort of Sri Lankan or South Asian, the possibility to become a filmmaker is not in your set of dreams, because you don't. I didn't know anybody who was a filmmaker. I didn't even know anyone who was an artist. I didn't even know anyone who was a writer.
I don't even know how big the film industry is, actually.
Yeah, it's quite small. It is small. So I just never thought it was quite possible. I always wanted to be one, I think, since I was about 16 or 17, but I never knew how to be one. And going to film school was never an option for me. So when I made my first short film, I was already pretty old. I certainly was not one of those filmmakers in my 20s experimenting or trying that out. So, but once I did that, I knew that this is what I wanted to do.
But, I mean, wasn't there like any kind of doubt in you? I mean...
Yeah, there's always doubt. I believe in doubt. I mean, I think that's an important thing to say. I do believe in always having doubt and finding a way to overcome certain doubts. But yeah, the doubt hasn't gone away now either. The doubt is always there. But yeah, I think I also believe in trying things out and not being afraid to fail and not being afraid to, I don't know, have an edit that's 2.5 years long. Like, you have to keep going till you get there. So yeah, I think that's important in life.
But what was actually driving you? What was the big thing you wanted to tell all of us through your movies?
I think I just loved it. I think as soon as I was on set to do my first short film, and I had assisted on a short film before, when I was there, nothing else I did in my life I loved as much as that. And that, I think, just keeps you going.
What do you love about it?
I just love the working with the actors in front of you, the camera, the sense of immediacy and urgency. Something is coming into life right in front of you where nothing existed before. It's really from action to cut. It's magic. Yeah, it really is.
And you wrote the script of your actual movie as well. Yeah. It must be such a pleasure to see that something you imagined on your kitchen table or your desk actually happens.
Yeah. It really is. It's been a long road. It took me about 1.5 to 2 years to write the script. And then, of course, the shoot is always fast. I mean, we shot only for 30 days. And then it took another 2 years to finish it. So doesn't quite feel real yet. But yeah, it'll feel real eventually.
You just told us that there's not a big film industry in Sri Lanka and not a lot of people used to work with the film industry. As I watched your movie, I had the impression you were actually filming in a real village or two real villages. So were there a lot of people, being astonished and watching you while you did that? Or?
Oh yeah, all our extras were farmers from the villages. Yeah, because we had no money, and we would go every morning to collect all these village people, and then they had to get back before the harvest at a certain time. So we had to shoot quickly, and then we had to run. But so they were all actually from the village, not the main cast, of course, but the extras. And but yeah, it was also kind of remote, the locations we shot. But having said that, also in South Asia and in Sri Lanka, of course, we have a big influence of Indian films. And so still cinema is still like magic to everybody. They grew up with stars, they grew up, with everything coming in the radio and television. So yeah, they know cinema.
But it's really far from a Bollywood movie.
Yeah, this is not a Bollywood movie. I mean, this is definitely not. Yeah. But it also, I think, falls within a tradition of certain Sri Lankan filmmakers who I have looked up to, as I was saying, like Vimukthi and Prasanna and Asoka Handagama, whose films I've been influenced by. And they don't make Bollywood movies either, of course. And this film comes at the end of that tradition, or is the next step for that. Not directly, but I definitely think that it falls within a certain Sri Lankan filmmaking.
You had the feeling that filming with this crew actually changed something in the mind of your crew already? Were people talking that haven't been talking before? Or?
Yeah, I think that it was a really, we were a family, the whole crew together, and I think it was a really emotional experience for everybody. I don't think that crew had done a Tamil film before, and also for us, I mean, I think the ADs were Tamil, and there was a few crew members that were Tamil. Yeah, it was a great experience. I think what we all realized was that we were not there to talk about the politics. We're not interested actually in the politics. We're there to make a film. We're there to tell a story, and we're all working to give the best of ourselves as artists to that story. And that, I think, brought us together. And I do think in the industry, in the film industry, that is true, that we are together as artists, and we're not, hopefully we don't let politics divide us.
But still, you made this movie so that we can all learn something from the past. So what is it that we all should learn from it?
I don't know. I think everybody will take something different from the movie, hopefully. But I think if there's anything, it's just that we can't think that the past doesn't matter because it's always in us. And I think we just have to learn how to face it, and that's really hard. I think it is hard to face the past, especially when you yourself have failed or betrayed people and you have guilt in yourself. You can't just put that aside and pretend that we'll continue in the future. It's always in you.
Well, your film is screening tomorrow.
Yes.
I wish you all the best for it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here, and have a great journey.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.